Some guy said in the comment section of the last video, we're going down a rabbit hole on this one. Hold that thought. Talking today about Tartaria. They had a thing going, had a good run. About 1500 to 1800, give or take. About 250 years, roughly, 300. In North America, they were called the Moors. Black people. You want to talk about going down rabbit holes. There's talk of like free energy with great antennas, obelisks, some people say, harmonious societies, great technological advances that the world had never seen before. All of a sudden, Tartaria is just wiped off the map. It's kind of Greater Siberia now, and some people say, well, it never even existed. Well, clearly it did. I remember this much information on it, a glancing mention in the textbooks when I was in school, maybe 6th grade. You're talking 1984, 85-ish, somewhere in there. Now I'm sure there's zero. When you got people saying it's never even been a thing, they've pretty well wiped it off the map, as they do certain societies. We're coming back around to that. Information is hard to get on this stuff. And that's where things like the Library of Alexandria would be helpful. This was a massive place, an institute of learning. You're talking 40, 80,000, I don't know how many, tens of thousands of volumes. It was a gathering place for information. And yes, the Library of Alexandria was some people say burned, some people say it only partially caught on fire. It just kind of fell out of favor. What it was a gathering house of information. And where did all that information go? Now, you're talking with Alexandria, you're talking about, about the time of Christ, AD 30, 55, somewhere in there. What it became was politically corrupted. It wasn't so many students then and young people learning. There was still this vigor for knowledge, but because of the corruption of the times, only certain political appointees were allowed access to the library. Sometimes even only certain athletes. I assume they meant Olympic athletes at the time. It just became this little hive of crap. Still, where did the information go? So it makes information now harder to access. But you hear things like free energy, and that perks me up. The trouble with that is there's still physical evidence on the planet that these societies existed. There's cathedrals that still exist. And I don't know, I don't have enough information to tell which was which. Some of them were clearly just power generators. There wasn't enough room in these buildings for people to worship and gather together and stuff like that. Clearly, granite towers, round windows to harness the light, voices that resonate. So you got light now, and you get the resonant voices. Light and sound clearly lined up on these grids, these planetary grids, just like the pyramids that were found by the Egyptians, not built. No, we built the Egyptians built them to bury some dead people in them. How many dead pharaohs have been drug out of the pyramids in Egypt? None, to my knowledge. Again, clearly power generation things. So then you hear things like free energy. Well, now wait, what are we talking about here? This is a curious thing. Now, also on the cathedral note, there was a time where some of these cathedrals were considered healing centers. Yes, you would go to praise and worship, but it was also a place of healing. Again, the light, the sound, and these things still exist. Well, then we come into the natural disaster part of things. And natural disasters happen, obviously. But mud floods, physical evidence, once again, you can see it in Seattle, in America, and you can see it in Seattle, you can see it in New York. You could see it in Chicago before the Great Fire of, was that 1900-something? Before basically the entire city of Chicago burned. These mud floods were formerly first floor, street level rooms complete with windows and doors, are now encased in mud as hard as concrete. I mean, there's physical evidence that exists, so we can't just deny this kind of stuff out of hand. Anyhow, we come to this point. Roughly about every 250, 300 years, there's a reset. And we saw one of these resets in 1776, and people say, oh, well, it's the founding of a new country. Well, it wasn't a new country, maybe new people in it, but there was a country before that. What we did see in 1776 that had never been seen before was this mass inception and infusion of insane asylums, penitentiaries, prisons, and orphans, and all these things tie together. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, if there's this reset, and now we're doing away with Tartaria, we're doing away with free energy, what about the people that still remain that were like, hey, what'd you do with all the free energy? If it becomes socially acceptable to talk about that taboo subject, we don't deal in the past here. These people were locked up, especially the women. Oftentimes the men were killed. So now you'd have to be insane to raise a child out of wedlock, and they'd take the children from the women and lock them up as they're screaming, what'd you do with the free energy? Lady's crazy. What is she talking about? Free energy. Insane asylums. Never been seen in such proliferation before. And what does that do? Well, you yank the kids from the woman. Now we have this overabundance of orphans. Parents have been killed off, perhaps. And we have, again, physical evidence of this overabundance of orphans. And they called them Cabbage Patch Kids. Generally speaking, the little boys were found in fields of cabbage, and the little girls were found in rose gardens and rose bushes. Where did all these children come from? Now, there's a sketchy part, as there is of all things, that say it's Illuminati-based, and they started cloning children. What we do know is there was an overabundance of orphanages and all these babies that didn't have any parents all of a sudden. There's postcards that exist, repopulation postcards. Come adopt a child. Isn't it great? And a lot of these kids were adopted and taken to the Midwest, some of them by loving parents, don't get me wrong, but a lot of them just because that was labor. So you take them to the Midwest, you got a kid that you got no ties to really, and you can exploit their labor. All it costs is the cost of raising a kid at the time, a mouth to feed. Fascinating. Trouble with that is, where did all the parents go? Well, again, hauled away to insane asylums, killed in various wars. You get far enough along, you get the Spanish flu. That was the late 1800s. By then, Tartaria was a distant memory. You know, we're done with all that. We've got a brand new country. It's called the United States of America. And isn't it great? But we still got all these orphan kids. So come down to the local orphanage and pick you one up right away. Dirt cheap. Work like a slave. Be great for everybody. I think it was about the 1980s. I was still a kid. And they came out with the dolls. Cabbage Patch Kids, they were called. And you didn't purchase a Cabbage Patch Kid. You did. The parents did. But for the kid, you didn't purchase a doll, a Cabbage Patch Kid. You adopted it. There's a whole story built behind it, much like the one, look up the first silent film ever recorded and the second silent film ever recorded. So they got these dolls and their cabbage, and supposedly, again, I don't know, because information is still difficult to get, even though we have access to more of it than we've ever had, and I'll get back to that in a second. Supposedly, if you got one of these dolls and say it was defective or had stitching coming out or whatever, you could send it back to the manufacturer, and at their discretion, they would replace it or they would repair it. If they repair it, they'd just send it back to you, no big deal. But if it was too cost prohibited, they'd send it back to you with a death certificate. This whole thing is just as sketchy as the day is long. I want to know. I want to know about the histories of these things. Was there free energy? And I think what it comes down to is, seems to me like, these families that rule the world, I want to say there's about 13 of them. About every 250 years, people get a little comfortable, a little confident, now we have access to a little more information. Maybe now we can start digging into a Tartaria. And what the heck's going on here? And all of a sudden, and now it's time for a reset. Well, guess which country just celebrated its 250th year of existence? The good old US of A. And then you look on the WEF website and it's talking about a great reset by 2030. Isn't that fascinating? Getting a little big for our britches. Getting a little too comfortable. It's a little too easy to access food now. And there's another thing, when these pyramids and these great cathedrals, things we couldn't even remotely accomplish today. Well, it's because they had all the time in the world. Yeah, because food was so easy to come by back then. We're told that everybody was on this agrarian existence, just scrambling to get by, basically. Got to plant the crops, got to harvest crops, got to get the crops, kill the fatted calf, Be time of you working your butt off, man. You ain't got time to sit around and build pyramids precisely aligned with planetary grids and the astronomy and everything else that goes into it. What do you think Stonehenge was? After years of not knowing, it's like, well, what the heck was it? It's a power generator. There's a lot of people that have done a lot of videos, much more informative and better detailed than this one. I just want to bring the idea to you. And this kind of ties in with a book I'm reading currently. It's called Birthright by Timothy Alberino. Fascinating read. And he takes it from the biblical perspective and where these technologies came from, how they came about. Places like Baalbek, where these massive, multi-hundred-ton stones of granite are fitted so perfectly you can't get a piece of paper between the cracks of them. What were we building here? How are they building it, and where did they get the technology? Well, this book covers that, as this video kind of covers that. Interesting stuff. If you know anything more about it, or you can point me in the right direction, or you got anything to say about it, you can put it in the comments. I appreciate your time. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.